Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing you've been playing the wealth game with the wrong rules your entire life. You've worked hard, saved a little when you can, trusted the system. And yet, quietly, silently, money keeps slipping away from you and into the hands of people who seem to know something you don't. The uncomfortable truth is this: the wealthiest people in history didn't get rich by accident. They followed patterns, repeatable decisions, mindsets, and strategies that you were never taught. Tonight, we're breaking those patterns open. You're watching Hidden Finance, where we uncover the secret histories, the buried decisions, and the invisible mechanics of money, so you can stop guessing and start playing the game the way the winners always have. Before we talk about what you must do now, we need to understand one thing: wealth has never really been about luck. It has always been about position, timing, and behavior. From the oil barons of the 1800s to the tech billionaires of today, the details change, but the core playbook repeats. Own assets, control cash flow, and let time do most of the work. The problem is, most people don't even know they're in the game until it's already late. To see this clearly, we have to travel back, far beyond stock apps and crypto charts, to an era when wealth meant land, factories, and steam. In the late 19th century, a young bookkeeper named John D. Rockefeller walked the streets of Cleveland, earning a few cents an hour. The United States was chaotic, raw, and full of risk booms, busts, no safety nets. But Rockefeller noticed something others ignored. Oil wasn't just a product, it was a future monopoly. He saved aggressively, almost fanatically, living below his means when most people spent every dollar they earned. Then he did something that almost every future millionaire would copy. He took his savings and bought income-producing assets, not status. While others competed for higher salaries, he competed for ownership. Small pieces of businesses that would eventually pay him whether he worked or not. That mindset, assets over appearance, became one of the most powerful wealth engines in history. Across the Atlantic, another young man, Andrew Carnegie, started even lower on the ladder. A poor immigrant boy in a textile factory, no connections, no inheritance. His advantage wasn't money, it was a mindset. He devoured books, sought mentors, and studied every machine, every system, every trade route around him. He upgraded his skills deliberately, constantly putting himself closer to the flow of capital, not just the work being done. Carnegie's story reveals a second timeless rule: before money compounds, skills do. Every past millionaire, from industrialists to investors, treated knowledge as their first real asset. They were obsessed with understanding how money moved, who controlled it, where it flowed, and why. Then, when opportunity came, a new factory, and new technology, a new market, they were ready. They had the skills, the courage, and the capital to act. The early 1900s turned these playbooks into empires. Henry Ford did not invent the car, but he reinvented how it was built. He saw that efficiency, systems, and scale were wealth multipliers. For every rich factory owner who stayed stuck in the old ways, there was a Ford, a Rockefeller, or a Carnegie willing to rethink the model entirely and own the new system. The first lesson for you now is hidden here. The big money rarely goes to the person doing the most work. It goes to the person designing the system that multiplies work. But then the illusion shattered. In 1929, the stock market crashed. Fortunes evaporated in days, factories closed, and millions were thrown into the Great Depression. This is where the real difference between ordinary people and enduring millionaires showed itself. Many panicked, sold everything, and swore off markets forever. The wealthiest, or those who would become wealthy, did something else. They stayed calm, protected their cash, and when prices were falling off a cliff, they quietly bought. One young man, John Templeton, would later become legendary for this exact behavior. At the brink of World War II, when fear was at its peak and most investors wanted nothing to do with stocks, Templeton bought shares in dozens of companies trading at rock-bottom prices, some even in bankruptcy. He didn't buy because it felt good, he bought because the math was on his side. The world was not ending, He realized, and when it didn't, those beaten down assets would recover massively. They did. He became one of the greatest investors of the 20th century. Templeton and many like him followed another rule past Millionaires' share. They separated feelings from decisions. They understood a brutal truth: markets reward patience and punish emotion. In every crash, they assumed the future would eventually normalize, and that value bought in crisis would pay off in calm. It wasn't magic, it was discipline, executed when it hurt the most. After World War II, the global economy changed shape. New technologies, global trade, and rising middle classes created more opportunities than history had ever seen. In the United States, a young man named Warren Buffett started reading about stocks at age 11. He wasn't chasing fast money. He studied businesses, balance sheets, and management teams, trying to answer one simple question: if I own this for decades, will it keep making more money? Buffett's genius wasn't that he found crazy lottery ticket stocks. It was that he applied old rules ruthlessly in a new era: buy great assets at fair prices, hold them for a very long time, and let compounding quietly do what it always does: turn small sums into massive fortunes. He lived modestly, avoided lifestyle inflation, and reinvested relentlessly. It's the same mentality Rockefeller had with oil, Carnegie with steel, and Ford with factories: own the engine, not just the output. By the 1980s and 1990s, a new kind of millionaire was rising: the tech founder. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and later Jeff Bezos didn't just work for companies, they created them. They identified a coming wave: personal computing, the internet, online retail, and positioned themselves not as employees riding the wave, but as owners building the surfboard. They took enormous early risk, but with a pattern that echoes the past: deep study of an emerging industry, obsessive focus, and a willingness to reinvest every dollar back into growth instead of cashing out early. The biggest turning point in this story is not just new industries, it's access. For centuries, most people had no way to buy a share in a railroad, a steel mill, or an oil field. But today, with a phone in your pocket, you can own pieces of the world's greatest businesses in seconds. The opportunities that once belonged only to Rockefellers and Morgans are now technically available to almost everyone. Yet, paradoxically, the wealth gap persists. Why? Because having access to the tools isn't the same as following the rules. Look at every era, every millionaire, and the same decisions appear. They prioritize ownership over consumption. They buy assets that throw off cash dividends, rent, profits, rather than liabilities that demand more cash every month. They use time, not timing, as their main strategy, trusting that years of compounding beat any short-term guess. And they treat every economic crisis not just as danger, but as a transfer of assets from the impatient to the prepared. Today, we face our own storms. Global debt is at record highs, inflation eats away at savings, housing feels out of reach, and headlines scream about bubbles and crashes. It can feel impossible to get ahead, but look through the eyes of history's millionaires, and a different picture emerges. Volatility is not a signal to sit still, it's a clue. It tells you where the world is changing, where old systems are breaking, and where new ones will rise. Those pressure points are where wealth is quietly built. So what must you do now in practical, urgent terms? First, you need to flip your identity from earner to owner. No matter your income, a fixed percentage of every dollar you touch must be captured and converted into productive assets. That might be low-cost index funds, a diversified basket of stocks, a small rental property, or equity in a business you help build. The amount matters less than the habit. Rockefeller started with pennies. Buffett started with a few $100s. The pattern is the same: buy assets regularly, hold them, and don't interrupt compounding. Second, you must treat your skills like your first portfolio. Past millionaires invested aggressively in their own capabilities long before they had large accounts. In a world of automation and AI, the greatest returns will still go to people who can solve hard problems, manage systems, lead people, and understand money. That means reading deeply, seeking mentors, and intentionally moving closer to the flow of capital, working in or around industries where scale, not just hours, multiplies value. Third, you need what Templeton, Buffett, and nearly every financial giant shared, a written strategy. Not a vague idea, a clear, boring, repeatable plan. For example, I invest X% of my income every month into diversified, long-term assets. I do not sell because of fear, news, or politics. I only change my plan when my life changes, not when markets fluctuate. Past millionaires were not improvising every day. They had rules that protected them from themselves. In a world of constant alerts, clickbait, and hot tips, those rules are your armor. Fourth, understand that every extra dollar you spend inflating your lifestyle is a vote against your future freedom. History's enduring wealthy were often surprisingly frugal early on. They weren't trying to look rich, they were trying to become rich. They drove older cars, lived in modest homes, and funneled the difference into investments. Not because they were cheap, but because they understood opportunity cost. Every status purchase delayed their escape from needing a paycheck. The world will always tempt you to signal wealth. Quietly building it is harder and infinitely more powerful. Finally, you must reframe time itself. Most people think in days, maybe months. Millionaires think in decades. When Carnegie built steel plants, when Ford designed factories, when Bezos reinvested Amazon's profits for years without big dividends, they were trading short-term comfort for long-term dominance. You may not be building a global empire, but the principle is identical. The earlier you start, the more ruthless you are about consistency, the more your future self becomes the person others call lucky. The consequences of ignoring these patterns are already visible. Whole generations feel trapped working harder than ever, yet owning almost nothing. Meanwhile, a minority quietly accumulate more and more of the world's productive assets. That's not just about greed, it's about rules being applied unevenly. Some people were taught how money really works. Most were taught only how to earn it and spend it. History does not repeat perfectly, but it does rhyme. And right now, you have a choice which rhyme you'll follow. Here's the uncomfortable reality. There is no secret button, no overnight blueprint, no hack that turns you into Rockefeller or Buffett by next year. But there is a repeatable path, traced over and over by people who started with little and built a lot. Own more, consume less, invest first, spend second. Seek knowledge before returns, be greedy for time in the market, not timing the market. And when everyone else is panicking, remember that the largest fortunes were often born in the darkest hours. We live in an age where the tools of wealth are closer to your hands than to any generation before you. And yet they've never been more distracting, more confusing, or more gamified. Your job is to step back and ask, what would Rockefeller do with this app? What would Buffett do with this paycheck? What would Carnegie do with this spare hour? Because the gap between knowing these stories and acting on their lessons, that gap is where most dreams quietly die. So as you close this video, don't just feel inspired. Translate that feeling into your first concrete move. Open the account, automate the transfer, start the emergency fund. Enroll in the course that upgrades your skills. Draw your personal wealth plan on paper and give it rules you will actually follow. The past millionaires already wrote the script. You just have to decide if you're going to keep watching from the audience or finally step onto the stage. This is Hidden Finance. Thank you for watching, for thinking deeper, and for daring to see money not just as something you earn, but as a system you can finally learn to master. And remember, the greatest secret of wealth isn't that it's reserved for a chosen few, it's that its rules were always hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone like you to use them.